Hi, I am Sophia. Welcome to True Payback, where story hits different. Hit subscribe. Let's dive in.
The invitation to my own gala arrived in my email on a Tuesday afternoon in September, forwarded by my assistant Nadia with a note that said, "Thought you'd want to see how it turned out." The design team did good work. It had, in fact, turned out beautifully. The event committee had chosen deep navy and gold as the color scheme. My suggestion passed through an intermediary the way all my suggestions were passed. The venue was the Meridian Grand on 5th, a restored Beaux-Arts ballroom that I had specifically requested because my grandmother had attended a function there in 1974 and described it to me once as the most beautiful room she had ever stood in. The program listed 17 community healthcare organizations that would receive funding that evening. The total distribution was $3.1 million. The event was called the Harlow Foundation Annual Gala. The Harlow Foundation was named for my grandmother. Nobody at the gala knew that. Nobody in my family knew it either. Not the name, not the funding, not the 4 years of quiet, careful work that had turned a private conviction into an institution that now operated in 6 cities. My name did not appear anywhere in the program. My parents were listed as honorary patrons. I had arranged that too because I am, apparently, a woman who cannot stop giving people things they haven't earned, and the therapist I see on Thursday afternoons would have something to say about that if I ever told her the full story, which I haven't yet. My name is Priya Harlow Nair. I was born Priya Nair in 1982, in a suburb of Chicago to parents who had immigrated from Kerala in the late 1970s and built, through a combination of extraordinary discipline and genuine talent, a small empire in commercial real estate. By the time I was 12, Nair Properties managed 47 buildings across the Chicago metro area. By the time I was 22, it managed 116. I did not go into the family business. This is the original wound if you want to trace things back to their source. Not the sharpest wound, not the one that took the longest to close, but the first one. The place where the story of my family and the story of myself began to diverge and never fully returned to parallel. My parents, Suresh and Meena Nair, had a plan. The plan was architectural in its precision. My older brother Dev would take the operations side of the business, I would take the financial and community development side, and together we would expand what they had built into something that would carry the Nair name into the next generation. My father presented this plan with the same calm authority he brought to everything, sitting at the head of the dining room table when I was 17, as if the plan's existence made it inevitable. I listened carefully. Then I said I wanted to study public health. The silence that followed was the kind that restructures a room. Public health, my father said finally, the way you repeat a word in a foreign language you've just heard for the first time. There are communities in this city that don't have adequate access to preventive care, I said. I had been thinking about this for 2 years. I had facts. I had statistics. I had the particular clarity of a 17-year-old who has found the thing she was built to do and has not yet learned to be afraid of saying so. I want to work on that. I want to build systems that address it. You can do community work through the foundation arm of the business, my mother said. She was not dismissive, she was, I think, genuinely trying to find a shape that held both things. Dev handles operations. You handle community investment. It works. I want to do it properly, I said. With the training and the infrastructure to do it right. My father looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "This is a phase." It was not a phase. I went to Northwestern for undergrad public health and policy, then to Johns Hopkins for my master's, then spent 3 years at a federal health initiative in Washington that no one had heard of but that quietly shaped how 3 states restructured their community clinic funding models. I was good at it, not in the modest, deflecting way people say they're good at things but genuinely, measurably good. My supervisor at the federal initiative, a woman named Dr. Carol Webb who had 40 years in public health infrastructure, told me once that I had the rarest combination she encountered in the field. I understood systems and I understood people, and most people only understood one. I came back to Chicago in 2010 and took a position running community health programs at a regional hospital network. I was 28. Over the next 8 years, I built a department that expanded from a staff of 6 to a staff of 41, managed a portfolio of community partnerships worth approximately $12 million annually, and developed a mobile clinic model that was subsequently adopted by 9 other hospital networks across the Midwest. I married a man named Thomas Harlow in 2013, a structural engineer from Milwaukee, gentle and precise and funny in the dry way that takes a while to recognize. And we have a daughter named Asha who is now 9 years old and has her father's patience and my inability to let an interesting problem go unsolved, which is a combination that will serve her well and occasionally exhaust the people around her. I also quietly began building the Harlow Foundation. The idea started in 2015 after my grandmother, my mother's mother, Kamala Harlow Nair, who had taken the hybrid name after marrying my Anglo-Indian grandfather in 1968, died at 81 and left me specifically and intentionally a sum of money that she had been setting aside for 30 years. The sum was $2.1 million. The will was specific, for Priya to use as she knows how. He has always known how. My grandmother had watched me from the beginning. She had been at the dining room table the night I said public health to my father's silence. She had not said anything then either, but 2 weeks later she had appeared at my bedroom door and sat on the edge of my bed and said in Tamil, "Do not let them make you smaller than you are. Build the thing. I will watch." She watched for 23 more years. When she died, she gave me the means to build it properly. The Harlow Foundation took 4 years to structure correctly. Legal framework, tax status, governance, the identification of partner organizations, the development of a funding model that could sustain multi-year commitments rather than one-time grants. I did this work in evenings and weekends alongside my hospital role with Thomas as my sounding board and Nadia, who had followed me from the hospital network when I eventually left, as my operational anchor. I did not tell my parents. This requires explanation because it was not a decision I made lightly or without cost. My parents are not villains. I want to be precise about this because the story is easy to tell in a way that makes them into caricatures, and the caricature is not true. Suresh and Meena Nair are people of genuine accomplishment and real love who built something extraordinary from nothing, who sacrificed in ways I can enumerate but cannot fully feel, and who carry as the price of that sacrifice a rigidity about what success looks like that is nearly impossible to reason with from the inside. My father loves me. I'm certain of this. He loves me in the particular way of a man who expresses love through provision and planning, who cannot easily separate "I want good things for you" from "I know what the good things are." When he dismissed public health as a phase, he was not being cruel. He was being, in his own language, protective. He had worked too hard and survived too much to watch his daughter choose a path that looked, from the outside, like stepping away from security. The problem is that his language and my language have never fully translated. My mother is subtler and, in some ways, more difficult. Meena Nair manages reputation the way other people manage breathing. Automatically, continuously, without full awareness of how much energy it consumes. He cares what the community thinks. He cares what the extended family thinks. He cares what people at the temple think. This is not vanity. It is, I believe, a survival mechanism from years of being an immigrant woman in spaces that were not designed for her, where reputation was one of the few things she could control. But the mechanism now operates independent of its original purpose, and its primary casualty for most of my adult life has been any version of me that didn't fit the legible narrative. Dev was the legible narrative. Dev ran operations. Dev had 3 children and a house in Naperville and attended every family event with the pleasant, untroubled energy of a man who has never been asked to choose between who he is and who his parents want him to be, because those two things happen to be the same. I was the other story. The one that required explanation. The one my mother sometimes described at temple gatherings as our daughter who does nonprofit work. The word nonprofit carrying, in her particular inflection, a gentle, apologetic weight, as if she were announcing that I had chosen to be a poet. The irony being that my nonprofit work had, by 2023, distributed over $9 million to community health organizations across 6 cities and was on track to exceed $4 million in a single year for the first time. I didn't tell them because I knew what would happen if I did. There would be a meeting. There would be opinions. My father would want to be involved in governance. My mother would want the foundation named differently or branded differently, or repositioned in a way that made it more legible to her social world. The slow, careful structure I had built, the anonymity that protected the foundation's integrity, the naming that honored my grandmother, the methodology I had developed over years, would become a negotiation. And I had spent enough of my life negotiating the terms of myself. So I kept it quiet. I kept it separate. I let it be mine. The invitation that brought my parents to the Meridian Grand on the evening of October 14, 2023, came through the Foundation's community board, whose chair, A woman named Eleanor Park, former Deputy Commissioner of Public Health for the City of Chicago, who had known me for 11 years and was one of 3 people in the world who understood the full picture, suggested that honoring Suresh and Meena Nair as honorary patrons would be appropriate given their decades of community investment through Nair Properties. She meant it genuinely. My parents had done genuine good through their business. The designation was not invented. What Eleanor did not tell them, what I specifically asked her not to tell them, was anything about the foundation's founding donor. The plan, such as it was, had not been a plan at all. I had not arranged to be there. I had intended genuinely to stay home as my parents expected, to watch Asha work on the model bridge she was building for her school science project, to have the quiet evening that had become, over years, my true reward after days of public work. My parents had called that afternoon to confirm I wasn't coming. This is the part that changed things. My mother had called at 3:47 p.m. I know the time because I was in the middle of a funding review call with Nadia and stepped out to take it. "We're leaving for the gala at 7, she said. "I just want to confirm you're not planning to come." "I wasn't invited," I said, which was technically true and also slightly absurd given the circumstances. "Good. This is an important night for the Nair name. The right people will be there. Your father has worked very hard on our relationship with the foundation and I don't want..." She paused. "You understand. It's not personal. It's okay, Mom. You can come to the next one. The smaller events." I stood in the hallway outside my office and looked at the wall and thought, the next one? The smaller events. The smaller events. Of the foundation my grandmother funded and I built. "Mom," I said, and my voice was very steady, "do you know who funds the Harlow Foundation?" "It's an anonymous donor. Very generous. Eleanor Park has been somewhat cagey about it, which I find odd, but these things are sometimes structured for tax purposes." "Right," I said. "I'll see you soon." I hung up. I stood in the hallway for another moment. Then I went back into the funding review call and finished it, and afterward I told Nadia I would be attending the gala after all, and asked her to call the Meridian Grand and ensure my seat was arranged, and went home to tell Thomas. Thomas, who had known every piece of this for 8 years, listened to the whole thing and then said, "So tonight." "Tonight," I said. He looked at me carefully. "How do you feel?" I thought about it. "I feel like I've been carrying something for a very long time and I'm tired of carrying it alone." He nodded. "Wear the green dress." Asha helped me with my hair, which she always insists on doing and which always results in something slightly asymmetrical that nonetheless looks better than what I'd produce myself. She is 9 and has strong opinions about earrings. I wore the diamond pendant, my grandmother's, given to me the year I left for Northwestern, and Asha approved it with the gravity of a professional consultant. "Where are you going?" she asked. "A party," I said. "For work." "For Nanny Kamala," I said. He thought about this. Asha had never met my grandmother. Kamala died 2 years before Asha was born, but she knew her from photographs and stories, and from the name on the foundation letterhead that she'd seen on my desk since she was old enough to read. "The foundation party?" "Yes." "Are Nana and Nanny going to be there?" "Yes." "Do they know you built it?" I looked at my daughter in the mirror. 9 years old, her father's patience and my inability to leave a problem alone. "They're going to find out tonight." She considered this with the same focused calm she applies to model bridges. "Good," she said and went back to adjusting my hair. I arrived at the Meridian Grand at 7:22 p.m. The ballroom was extraordinary. The event committee had honored the navy and gold brief with real commitment. The room glowed with it, warm and formal and serious in the way that spaces feel when the people in them understand what they're there for. The 17 partner organizations had representatives at every table, and I recognized faces from years of site visits and funding conversations and unglamorous Tuesday afternoon phone calls about clinic schedules and prescription access programs. These were my people. They knew me. Several of them saw me come in and moved toward me immediately, and I spent the first 15 minutes at the edge of the room in exactly the kind of conversation I am built for, specific, detailed, animated by genuine shared work. Dr. Marcus Webb from the Southside Clinic Consortium, whose mobile unit program I'd helped design in 2019. Fatima Odia from the Westside Maternal Health Initiative, who had spent 3 years building the case for the postpartum support program the foundation had funded in full. Roberto Salinas from Community Bridges, whose translation services program had expanded to 4 languages on our last grant cycle. They knew. They had always known. The anonymity was for the public record, not for the people doing the work. My parents arrived at 7:41 p.m. I saw them from across the room, my father in his navy suit, my mother in the deep burgundy silk she reserves for significant occasions, both of them carrying the particular confidence of people who know they belong in a room and have spent decades building the proof of it. They did not see me. Eleanor Park found me at the edge of the room at 7:55 p.m. She is 63, silver-haired, and possesses the kind of professional authority that makes rooms rearrange themselves around her without her having to ask. She took my hands in both of hers and said, "How are you?" "Nervous," I said, which surprised me to say aloud. She nodded, unsurprised. "It's okay to be nervous. You've been carrying this alone for a long time." "I know. Your grandmother would have loved this room." I looked at the ballroom, the chandelier light, the gold accents, the deep navy of the linens, the serious, purposeful faces of people who had given their working lives to the exact problems my grandmother had told me to spend mine on. She would have found 3 things to critique and then declared it perfect. Eleanor smiled. Yes. She would have. She looked across the room toward my parents, who were being greeted by Dev and his wife Anjali near the welcome table. "Ready." "Ready," I said. Eleanor Park called the room to order at 8:02 p.m. The Meridian Grand's acoustics are, appropriately for a Beaux-Arts room, exceptional. Her voice carried without effort. Around the room, 240 people settled into an attentive quiet, the kind that happens when the person speaking has earned the room's trust before they've said a word. "Good evening. Before we begin our program, before we celebrate the extraordinary organizations whose work you'll hear about tonight, before we talk about the $3.1 million that will leave this room and enter communities across this city, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the reason any of this exists." I was standing at the back of the room, near the entrance to the main hall. My parents were at table 3 near the front. I could see the back of my mother's head, the deep burgundy of her silk, the set of her shoulders as she listened to Eleanor with the polite attention of a patron at a function she has decided to take seriously. The Harlow Foundation was made possible by a single founding gift of $4.2 million, given anonymously in 2019. In the years since, that gift has grown, through careful stewardship, through additional anonymous contributions, and through the extraordinary work of our program team, into an institution that has distributed over $9 million to community health organizations and touched the lives of. Eleanor paused, and the pause was deliberate. An estimated 340,000 people in this city. The room was quiet. Tonight, with their permission, we are acknowledging that founding donor by name for the first time. The Harlow Foundation was not named for a stranger. It was named for a woman named Kamala Harlow Nair, who believed that the best use of what she had built in her life was to give her granddaughter the means to build something in hers. My mother's champagne glass stopped halfway to her lips. I watched my father turn to look at my mother, and I watched my mother turn to say something to him, and I watched Dev, 2 seats away, look up from his program with a particular expression. Not confusion, but the beginnings of a reckoning. The founding donor of the Harlow Foundation and its executive director for the past 4 years is Priya Harlow Nair. Eleanor looked to the back of the room. 240 people followed her gaze. I stood in the entrance of the Meridian Grand ballroom in my grandmother's diamond pendant and my green silk dress, and I looked at my parents, and I did not perform anything. No triumph. No vindication. Just presence. The simple, complete presence of a woman who had spent 20 years building toward this moment without ever quite letting herself believe it would arrive. My mother's champagne glass finished its journey to the table. Very carefully. My father's face did something I had not seen it do in a very long time. It opened, the same way my daughter's face opens when she solves something she'd been stuck on, that involuntary unlocking, the body's concession to a truth it hadn't expected. The room began to applaud. What happens after the applause is always more complicated than the applause itself. My parents found me 30 minutes later, near the edge of the room where Dr. Webb and I had been deep in a conversation about the next phase of the mobile clinic expansion. My mother arrived first. She moves quickly when she has decided to do something, and she took my arm and drew me slightly to one side with a gentleness I had not been prepared for. "How long?" she asked. "The foundation?" 4 years publicly. 8 years in development. She was quiet for a moment. She looked around the room, at the partner organization representatives, at the navy in gold, at the program in her hand with its 17 clinic names and its $9 million figure. Your grandmother's money. Her gift started it. Most of what you see tonight came from investment returns and subsequent contributions. You've been contributing. Yes. For years. Yes. My mother looked at the program in her hand for a long moment. Then she said in a voice that I recognized as the one she uses when she's carrying something too large for her usual register, I told you not to come tonight. You did. To your own event. Yes. She looked at me then. Really looked the way she rarely does because Mina ne'er moves through the world with such practiced purposefulness that stillness is not her natural mode. And I saw in her face something I can only describe as the specific grief of a parent who has just understood the full cost of a story they told themselves about their child. Priya, she said. And then she didn't say anything else because there wasn't anything else that needed to be said in that moment, and somehow that was the most honest thing she'd given me in years. My father arrived then with Dev behind him. My father is not a man who cries. In 38 years I have seen his eyes fill twice. Once at his mother's funeral and once at Asha's birth. They were not full now, but something in his face had the quality of a structure under pressure, holding. He said, the name. Harlow Foundation. Your grandmother. Yes. She knew. Before she died. She knew I would build something. The name was my choice after. He nodded slowly. He looked at the room. I watched him take it in the way he takes in buildings. Assessing structure, scope, what it cost to build, what it would cost to maintain. 340,000 people, he said. That's Eleanor's estimate. The direct service numbers are higher. The downstream effects are harder to quantify. Your mother and I, he stopped. Started again. We should have known. I didn't tell you. You had reasons not to. He said this without resentment, which was unexpected and undid something in me that I had not realized was held tight. I had been braced for defensiveness, for the pivot to why didn't you tell us, for the reconstituting of the narrative around their exclusion rather than my building. Instead my father was doing the thing I had so rarely seen him do, looking at a version of events that reflected poorly on his own management of something and staying in it instead of reorganizing around it. Yes, I said. I had reasons. I know what they were, he said. The evening continued around us. The program resumed. Eleanor introduced the 17 organizations. There were speeches, good ones, specific ones, the kind that remind you what money becomes when it's used correctly. I sat at a table near the front with Thomas, who had arrived at 8:30, and Fatima and Dr. Webb, and 2 board members who had known this night was coming and had been quietly looking forward to it. Dev found me during the dessert course. He sat down in the empty chair beside me and was quiet for a moment, watching the room. I want you to know, he said, that I had no idea. I know. I mean, I really, genuinely. He shook his head. I've been telling people at the temple that my sister does nonprofit work. I know. In the tone that means. I know what tone. He looked at me sideways. I'm sorry, Priya. Dev. No. I mean it. I've been part of the same story Mom and Dad were telling themselves, and I didn't question it because it was easier not to. That's its own thing. I looked at my brother, my older brother who had never been asked to choose, who had inherited the legible path and walked it without understanding that its ease was in part a product of my family's narrowness, because their full attention had always gone to the story that fit and away from the one that didn't. He wasn't wrong. He had been part of it. Thank you, I said. And I meant it. Thomas and I left at 10:30. We drove home in the particular quiet of 2 people who have been together long enough that silence is a form of conversation, and I looked out at the Chicago night and thought about my grandmother. Kamala Harlow had sat in the Meridian Grand in 1974 and described it as the most beautiful room she had ever stood in. She had attended a function there, I never knew what kind, as a young woman in a city that was not always glad to have her. And she had carried that room with her for 50 years and told me about it once, when I was perhaps 12, on a Sunday after temple when we were driving home together and the city was doing what cities do on Sunday afternoons, moving slowly and without ambition. There is a ballroom downtown, she had said, that I went to once when I was young. I want to go back someday. I don't know why I haven't. She never went back. She died at 81 without returning to the Meridian Grand. I had returned for her. I had built the reason to return. I had sat in that room tonight in her pendant, with her name on the program and her money in the foundation's bones, and I had watched my grandmother's ballroom fulfill the purpose I had imagined for it for years. She had told me to build the thing. She had said she would watch. I believe she was watching. I don't know what it means that I believe that, but I do, and I have learned at 38 not to interrogate the beliefs that sustain me without harm. My mother called the following morning at 8 o'clock. She had not slept much. I could hear it in her voice, that particular thinness that comes not from exhaustion but from a night of reckoning. I want to understand the governance structure, she said, which was her way of saying she wanted to be involved, and also her way of saying she understood now that involvement would be on terms I set rather than terms she negotiated. I'll send you the foundation documents, I said. There are board seats that will open next year. We can talk about what role makes sense. Pause. Your grandmother would have found 3 things wrong with that ballroom. I laughed. A real one, involuntary, the kind that releases something. She would have declared it perfect anyway. Yes, my mother said. She would have. Another pause. Longer. The pendant, she said. She gave it to you. When I left for college. She never told me. I know. My mother was quiet for a moment with that. With what it meant that her own mother had passed something to her daughter in a direction she hadn't been watching, had held a piece of the story she thought she knew and kept it for the telling that was right. She knew you, my mother said finally. The simplest true thing. The thing that cost her something to say. She did, I said. I hope you'll get to too. Asha asked me at breakfast how the party went. I told her it went well. She asked if Nana and Nanny had been surprised. I told her yes. She considered this, pouring cereal with the focus of someone conducting an experiment. Were they mad? She asked. No, I said. I think they were mostly sad they hadn't known sooner. That's different, she said. Yes, I said. It is. She ate her cereal. Across the kitchen, Thomas was making coffee, and the morning light was coming through the window at the angle it comes through in October. That specific Chicago October light that is already thinking about winter but hasn't committed yet. Asha had her model bridge on the counter. She was refining the cable tension, which she'd explained to me twice and I'd understood once. And the kitchen smelled of coffee and the particular industry of a 9-year-old at work. This is what I had built alongside the foundation. This kitchen this morning, this daughter who says that's different with the precision of someone who intends to spend her life making correct distinctions. Thomas, who had known every piece of it and chosen to keep showing up. Every Thursday and every gala eve and every quiet evening when I came home from work, still carrying the weight of other people's problems because I hadn't yet figured out how to set them down at the door. There is no clean resolution to what happened with my parents. There is a process, ongoing and imperfect, of 2 people learning to see a daughter they thought they understood. There is my father, who called 3 days after the gala to ask if he could visit the South Side Clinic Consortium, because he wanted to see the work directly. There is my mother, who has not yet asked about a board seat again but who sent me last week a photograph she found in her albums. Kamala Harlow Nair in 1974, dressed for a function, standing in front of a building that, upon examination, was the Meridian Grand. She had sent it with no message. Just the photograph. I had looked at it for a long time. My grandmother, young in a city that was not always glad to have her, standing in front of the most beautiful room she had ever been in. I put it in a frame. It sits on my desk now, next to the foundation letterhead, next to Asha's first attempt at a cable stay bridge design, next to the photograph Nadia printed of the full program from October 14th, 17 organizations, $3.1 million, and a ballroom that was finally, after 50 years, exactly what it had been promised to be. My grandmother told me to build the thing. I built it. He was watching.